great to see you. As folks are coming in from the waiting room, welcome. We're going to get started. So, hello everyone. My name is Ferris. I am the Assistant Dean for Policy Initiatives at the Brown School and a faculty director at the Social Policy Institute, leading training and education initiatives. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today to welcome you. Thank you for joining for our roundtable today, which is hosted by the Social Policy Institute. And the work is made possible thanks to partnerships with the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance and data.org, and with support from the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, all of whom are here today and we'll be hearing from shortly. So the Social Policy Institute is committed to fostering interdisciplinary cross-sector collaborations to design, test, and through innovative evidence-informed policy and practice solutions, reduce inequality in social, economic, health, and education, locally in St. Louis, nationally, and globally. Before we get started, we do want to hear from you all. So I'll ask Jenrose Fitzgerald to help us through a brief introductory activity together. Jenrose?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you here today. For an icebreaker today, I want to introduce myself. My name is Jenrose Fitzgerald. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator at Social Policy Institute, who is working on this Data Science for Social Impact initiative. And for an icebreaker, I thought you can say your job title currently, and then what job you thought you might have when you were a kid. So for me, this would be program coordinator / circus performer. So I'd love to see who's in the room and hear a little bit about your current titles and childhood aspirations in the chat. Marine biologist. Ginger, you thought big from the beginning. NBA superstar.
My son still thinks he's going to be an NBA superstar.
I kind of love that some of these answers are, even the ones that you thought you would be when you grew up, have some technology focus. That's kind of cool.
Big shout out to our aspiring astronauts, along with Ginger's son, NBA superstar. There's still time to be an astronaut.
Veterinarian, marine biologist. We have more than one marine biologist. Doctor, teacher, musician. I thought that would be a locomotive. However, I'm still a human being. That is a brilliant aspiration for a child. One thing that occurs to me when we think about, childhood aspirations is we're often, told about occupations that do good in the world. So teacher, veterinarian, or just, think big, think about making a big impact. And we don't really usually say data analyst or data person, but maybe we should, right? Maybe there's something to be said for increasing our conversation about the good that one can do in the world. So anyway, it's great to see all of these answers. And hopefully 20 years from now, when we hold an event like this, there will be a lot more data people for childhood aspirations. But anyway, thank you for playing, and I'm going to kick it back to Dan.
And if you haven't seen it yet, Jenrose just recently authored a blog on the Social Policy Institute website that we are all data people. So be sure to take a look at that. And I'm sure one of my colleagues would kindly put that in the chat if folks are interested. So thank you, Jenrose, and how great to hear from so many of our participants today. So conversations about policy change as well as effective data practices often begin with a problem. Organizations often cite capacity as a barrier for achieving social impact with data science. From their recent Inclusive Growth Challenge and grant process, which attracted more than 1,200 applications from all over the world, data.org reviewed the 100 that scored highest in their data science assessment and found that even top scoring applicants rarely held all the key ingredients to deliver impact. You'll be hearing a little bit more about this later on during our program. Clearly, there's so much opportunity for growth, improvement, capacity building, and most importantly, partnership in this critical area. So now, while you're all here and onto our plan for our time together today, we'll begin by defining and demystifying data science for social impact. what data looks like in the social sector, common barriers, and how data is hitting the ground in St. Louis. To help us with this, we'll welcome brief snapshot talks from Mastercard, data.org, and the Regional Data Alliance. While we're excited to share about this area and preliminary plans for our Data Science for Social Impact initiative, we are most excited to hear from you. How can we make this initiative as impactful and beneficial to St. Louis and your organizations? So we'll have a chance for you to engage in conversations with us and each other in small breakouts. And as we move into our programming, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Chapin Flynn, Senior Advisor and Senior Vice President of the Center for Inclusive Growth, the philanthropic hub of Mastercard. Chapin's responsibilities include the creation and execution of an integrated data science for social impact strategy, leading the development of strategy for leveraging Mastercard data products and services for social impact, and advising the Center for Inclusive Growth and Mastercard Strategic Growth team on the technical and data strategy aspects of data for social good. So with that, I'll turn things over to Chapin and just welcome again to all.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. I will be quite brief with my comments today. I'd just like to give everybody a very quick background, a little tiny bit on the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth and why we're here today. But more importantly, we have one area that we focus on, which is data for social impact. And let's talk about how we think about that. And I think then hand it off to Ginger to make it even more real. So the Center for Inclusive Growth at Mastercard is our primary philanthropic arm. We also administer a $500 million Mastercard Impact Fund, which was established in 2018, where we basically took 20% of the tax cuts we received from the US government and some European government agencies in 2018 and formed the Mastercard Impact Fund so that we could find ways to give back financially in addition to some non-financial ways that we give back. The Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth really has 4 pillars that we focus on. One is the promotion of financial security. So when you think about this one, and I know this is a ridiculously gigantic number, but we're bringing 1 billion people into the digital financial ecosystem. We've already gotten to 500 million, so we figured we'd try to shoot for even more. We also do a lot of work around small business and helping them recover from the COVID crisis. We look at how to help workers and support the economic mobility of workers, and in that area, it's things like portable benefits is one that we focus on. And then we improve the quality of life for all people everywhere, and that takes a whole lot of different forms. One that I'll talk about in just a few minutes, which overlaps data, is our inclusive growth score. I'll talk about that in just a second. And last but not least is the area that I focus on, which is data for social impact. And I'll talk a little bit today about kind of the things that we focus on within data for social impact and what those look like, and get over to Ginger. So when I think about our data for social impact strategy, we really think about it across 4 different threads. One is, how do we use our own data to set the tone? So we think if we're going to ask others to use data for social impact, we need to lead in that area as well. And so I'll talk a little more about that. We also feel like we need to sort of challenge the status quo and lead the charge relative to helping social impact organizations understand how they can use data and how to think about the use of data to outsize their impact. And so that's a lot of thought leadership. I'll talk a little more about that. Build the capacity of the social sector, and have a slide on that, and then create use cases. And that's really where I start blending into Ginger's presentation, because they're doing a great job with data.org of that. So I felt like the very first place I could go, I talked about Mastercard data. And so what we've done is we've created something called the Inclusive Growth Score. The Inclusive Growth Score is really it's inclusivegrowthscore.com for those that want to check it out. It's a free resource that we publish using Mastercard data and third-party data to talk about the inclusivity of an area. And I'll talk a little bit about what those parts look like. But in order to highlight that for this purpose, I grabbed the St. Louis specific example, took a little snapshot of the map, and then zoomed in on one census tract there that you can see. And so But what I did is we don't just leave it at this red, yellow, green level. We want to drill in and look at what does inclusive growth mean to us. And we define it across 3 dimensions. It's actually 18 total dimensions, but three big ones: place, economy, and community. And so when we see, okay, this doesn't have a great inclusive growth score, well, why is that? And I just chose to focus for this purpose on community, where it was quite low. The scores were quite low on a scale of 1 to 100. And this by itself is not actionable either, but once we start clicking into that even further, and we see that things like the percentage of females above the poverty line in this census tract is very low. The percentage of early education enrollment is very low. And those are the things that are driving the low inclusive growth score in this case. So what we did is we assembled all this data. We built really nice visualizations around it. But ultimately, the point is for policymakers to be able to go into this and look at where are the problems and how do I make those problems actionable and how do I track my progress against some goals in that area. So this is just one example of several that where we're using our own data combined with external data to really set the tone for what's happening in the marketplace. When I talk about leading the charge, a lot of this is around stretching the way people think about data for social impact and using data in social impact organizations. We're constantly publishing new material around things like our corporate data responsibility principles, closing data gaps to build more inclusive and sustainable economies around the world. These are just a few examples. This happens probably every week or so in the Center for Inclusive Growth about how we're trying to stretch people's thinking around this in social impact organizations. And we think a lot about how to build capacity in the sector, and I'm sure Ginger will touch on this too. But we think that a lot of the capacity building that's required is around education, both pre-university, university, and after university. And how do we make data for social impact part of the DNA of people that are coming up through the educational system and afterwards? We think about matchmaking. There are tons of people out there, tons of organizations out there that need help with data. And there's tons of people that want to help with data. And how do we connect those two audiences? We think about that. And then we also think about tooling. How do we make tools available to the marketplace at large to say, hey, this data thing isn't as hard as you think if you have the right tools. If you have a job description for who you need to hire, or any number, a business case that says, here's how I make a business case for evolving my data maturity. So we think a lot about these things in the capacity sector. And then lastly, and Ginger, don't get mad at me, I totally stole your slide, but I will not steal your thunder, and that is, but the point of this is actually to hand it off to Ginger in just a second, but is really to say, I think data.org really has helped us to highlight the importance of sharing success stories, and their challenge has allowed us to say, look at these great organizations and how they are truly using data to drive social impact. And I think Ginger will go into a little more detail, but I think having social impact success stories that we can point to and say, look how it's happened, look how others have done it, really paves the way for all organizations, all social impact organizations to go ahead and do that. And so this has been a fun journey. We have a long way to go, but I will. That's it. That was a little bit about how we think about it at Mastercard. And I think Dan probably very kindly wants to set Ginger up with a nice introduction like he did with me too, but I will turn it back over to Dan to give to Ginger.
Great, thank you so much, Chapin, for the terrific overview, the local example, and setting up so nicely into our next snapshot from data.org. So Ginger Zielinskie is the Chief Strategy Officer at data.org and is responsible for conceiving, managing, and executing strategic initiatives that best support and advance their mission. Ginger identifies, builds, and maximizes strong partnerships from global philanthropies to program partners to data science practitioners to drive systematic and meaningful change and build a stronger, more data-driven social impact sector. So for our next snapshot, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Ginger. Take it away.
Thank you, Dan. And thanks so much to the Institute for having us all here today. As always, thank you, Chapin, for your support of this type of work, both in regional areas like St. Louis as well as around the globe. And thank you to the Data Alliance in St. Louis for bringing folks together. That is such an important component of this work. Is actually the humans. It's not the data, but it's the partnerships that really matter, that can drive our collaborations forward. So lastly, thank you. I hear it's beautiful in St. Louis today and it's Friday afternoon. So thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Dan, that introduction sounds so fancy. I guess I want to start by saying I come by way of this work very honestly. I have an amazing job where I get to think about how we support the social impact sector as a whole and communities like St. Louis. Prior to coming to data.org, I, for 14 years, built, ran, and led a not-for-profit organization called Benefits Data Trust. And so really rolled my sleeves up in terms of how to share data across organizations, including government, local community-based organizations, and then across sector with private health companies, et cetera. And so I learned by doing, both in terms of how to share data, but really what it takes for organizations to build that capacity to be fully data-driven. And I'm so excited by the amount of energy and enthusiasm and opportunity that sits in front of us as the not-for-profit and social impact sector. So you all can see my screen. I'll actually go to slideshow so you can see it a little bit better. That's better. So I think that we all have a really good handle on the problem. As the not-for-profit sector and the social impact sector overall, we haven't had the luxury of investing in the technical infrastructure, the human talent infrastructure to take advantage of the data revolution. And from our perspective, we want to make sure that the best technology as a tool, not an end, but as a means to the end, to reaching our missions, that we're able to really unlock the power of data science for quote unquote good. I know a lot about algorithms and targeting, and in addition to making sure that I can get just the right pair of neutral pumps at the right time, it's also about how do we help people solve the most important problems of consequence, again, both locally and all the way out to globally. And there's a great overlap with some of the conversations that Chapin outlined, but the way in which data.org seeks to do that is to have conversations just like this, to honor the interdisciplinary nature of what data science for social impact really is, and to build the connective tissue for organizations, for individuals, for collaborations to learn and solve those concrete problems together using data. So as Chapin mentioned, we absolutely care about the use cases. Learn by kind of look like me strategies. Where are there opportunities to learn from our colleagues in the space that are using data science, just like some of all of you, to solve specific problems? Secondly, and probably most near and dear to my heart, is really thinking about the capacity of people and organizations that have committed their life and their professional careers to social impact. So it's about the organizations and just some blocking and tackling. It's not the sexiest stuff, but do we have the tools? Do we have the technical infrastructure? Are we secure? I know that all of us can get really kind of, our eyes can glaze over about our own security, but if we're serious about using data and data science, we have to get serious about what it takes to run secure organizations. And are we embedding the conversations around data across our organization? It's not just, it shouldn't be in a vacuum. It really is kind of a horizontal in terms of how organizations can think about their strategy, how they can think about their programs, how they can think about their fundraising, as well as their marketing and communications. We also are very invested in thinking about how to support leaders. As someone, I'm not a data scientist by training, and really evolved as my time as kind of at Benefits Data Trust in learning by doing, and I made a lot of mistakes. And it was also pretty lonely and a lot of times really risky. And so how do we arm leaders with the support required and the knowledge required to really be bold and brave enough to make this shift in terms of their organizational strategy and really lead through that change in order to close the gap, right? Like we have to be honest about the gap that exists and what we really need to do to accelerate progress. And then also we too think about, you know, how can we help? Like what are the shared resources? What are the shared data sets? What is the shared infrastructure? How do we reduce duplication in the marketplace and increase collaboration and increase access and understanding? And I really appreciated Jenrose, your blog piece, just talking about, yeah, we all use data and we all have a responsibility to demystify it, right? Like to make it accessible and make it usable. And I think that that's part of the matchmaking and convening that we need to do is to, this isn't about, you know, some tech geeks in the corner. This is about a way of working. And it truly is about being interdisciplinary in how we achieve that change. You know, I won't spend a lot of time here. We don't do anything in a vacuum. So partnerships like this really matter to us. And if there's a way that we can help St. Louis by pulling on what we've learned from Houston or Bangalore, we want to do that. And vice versa, we want to make sure that the world knows about the amazing things that you all are doing at the St. Louis Data Alliance and others. So that it's really about building those tendrils and that connective tissue to learn as an ecosystem. We want to create a digital community. We have an amazing URL. And we think that there's a great opportunity to turn that into a community where Dan and Jenrose and you all can share what you're learning, also your mistakes, your recommendations for how to tackle this work in the future. You know, so resources, chat rooms, et cetera. So you'll see more coming from there, data.org. So that's more of a stay tuned. And then we want to be a place where we can convene the conversations about, you know, what are the tough conversations. We don't have all the answers, no one does, but we should be able to have a civic discourse and really understand both the risks and opportunities of unlocking the power of data science to achieve social impact. So Chapin stole my slide. So I'll have to give him a tough time later, but these are the challenge awardee winners. And again, going through 1,250 applications was really just such an honor and such a learning experience. And there's so much amazing working happening in your neighborhoods, in your communities, in your organizations. And that momentum is alive and well and kicking across the globe. And we really think that there's just a fantastic opportunity to continue to lift up. And, you know, I know it can feel daunting, but I think we also want to just make sure that we're being delivered out, flipping that script and saying like, this is our moment. Like, you know, to our public health friends, you've been using data and data science for a long time. To our academic researchers, you've been using data and data science for a long time. The question is, how do we take advantage of the power of the tools that currently exist to supercharge and to really accelerate that work? Just a moment on talent, because it probably is the most important, I think, component. And I guess what I'll say most importantly is we cannot ask for responsible and democratized artificial intelligence until we have a democratized workforce. And we are all responsible for ensuring that there's diversity behind the keyboard in terms of who is building the models, who's deploying the data science. And I think, you know, that's how we actually achieve responsible AI. So we're committed to working with partners like Washington University to train 1 million purpose-driven data professionals. And we hope and are driven to make sure that that next generation of talent, whether it be new talent or existing talent within social impact or leaders, it really represents the communities in which we seek to support. I mentioned, we're also launching a organizational transformation fund. And I'll tell you a story. I had the great luxury of receiving a grant from the Weinberg Foundation, and it allowed me to capitalize my technology costs. Because any one of you that are running or in a not-for-profit organization and think that we can build a technical infrastructure on a 15 to 20% overhead, I call malarkey. Like it's just not possible. So what that grant allowed me to do was it allowed me to move to the cloud, to purchase a business intelligence tool, and to hire a chief technology officer from the private sector. We need to make sure that those opportunities in high-performing organizations are available so that our programs and our strategy can be more data-driven. And I'm really thrilled to be able to be working on the transformation fund. So that's what I've got. We are always around. We seek to be a matchmaker, a convener, a celebrator, and really a resource to a plethora of organizations across domains that are doing the hard work to drive towards being a more data-driven organization. So thank you for your amazing efforts on the ground, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation, and I really look forward to continuing it with you.
Well, thank you, Ginger, for painting a picture of what data looks like in the social sector. Hello, everyone. My name is Llena. I'm a graduate research assistant at the Social Policy Institute and part of the Data Science for Social Impact team. I would like to introduce our final speaker for today, who will talk about how does this all hit the ground in St. Louis. I can't think of a better person to lead this conversation than Paul Sorenson. Paul founded and leads the collaborative St. Louis Regional Data Alliance at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. The RDA supports local governments, nonprofits, funders, and universities in using data for the community benefit. The RDA is also actively involved in building public health data infrastructure to address COVID-19. Paul?
Thank you so much for that, Ivy, and good to see everybody here. A lot of familiar faces. Hoping to not bore you too much with an overview of who we are as the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance, especially alongside such fantastic colleagues from the Social Policy Institute, data.org, and Mastercard. So a little bit about the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance. We're 3 years old, almost exactly. And we were founded to address data fragmentation in the St. Louis region. And we talk about data fragmentation, that's really sort of twofold. There's fragmentation among data infrastructure, so systems not talking to each other, et cetera. But more importantly, there was also fragmentation around data people. There was often one data person, half a data person, scattered across, nonprofits, government entities, et cetera, and they didn't know each other. They didn't know who to call when they had a question. And that became really important, to sort of how we trusted each other and how we were able to, what were the conditions for sharing data across organizations. And so we got together and said, how do we address that? And you see our mission here to build shared data infrastructure and support strong data actors. But what you also see is that we were, to echo Ginger and Chapin, this is not about data for data's sake. This was about using data for racial equity, for community well-being, to help connect the dots. And so, all of that, I think, is something that we share and something that was echoed by the other speakers this morning or this afternoon, I guess. But one thing that we really wanted to highlight is why we think it's important to do this at the local level. Why the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance? Why are we sort of really committed to sort of planting our feet and planting our flags here in the region? And one thing that a mentor of mine, Paul Evanson, likes to talk about is that, we in this professional space talk about interdisciplinary and cross-sector, and, how different institutions, interact with each other. But interdisciplinary to most people is just life. Our work is not divided, or our lives are not divided into these buckets of health and education and government and community. They're all intersecting at all times. And in order to see those intersections, in order to have powerful data that can connect the dots and tell the stories around those intersections, we think that they're the most visible and they're the most impactful at the local level, which is why we think that a region like St. Louis and doing work locally to connect the data dots is so critical. So I'll talk for just a second about what we're trying to do to connect those dots. Knowing that many of you in this room are actively working alongside us and many partners on building these strategies. So one is around the data infrastructure component. So how do we share data? What tools do we need? What standards do we need, et cetera, to share data in public health, social services, education, community development. And what we're trying to do now with way too many emails that I probably owe to some of you is how do we co-develop infrastructure that both help those sectors better share data on the things that matter most to them in public health or education. But then how do we build those components of infrastructure together so they're more efficient, more impactful, more transparent for folks across the region. But more importantly, and I think the things that we're excited to dive into more explicitly today is the people component, is the foundation of this pyramid here. And looking to sort of connect the people on an ongoing basis who are doing this data for social impact work. And this is a critical component. This is a critical conversation that will inform how the RDA participates, how Social Policy Institute and other partners are really looking to dive in. So we're excited to talk more about the RDA, about our work. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to sign up to become a member. Free, easy, join us, over 315 folks in the region. But really, I think, what we wanted to express was our enthusiasm and our sort of like humble honor of being a part of this crew and figuring out how to best frame data science for social impact. So whoever I am handing the mic over to, it is handed.
Thank you so much, Paul. That would be me. As you can see, we have great partners on this project. Just going to share my screen. I feel really energized by the conversations happening around data for the social sector, both nationally and here locally and regionally. So thank you all for being a part of this work with us. We see a lot of opportunities here in St. Louis to move this work forward. And we know that folks have limited capacity and time and resources to do this work. So that is where we hope our initiative can be of use. We are tasked with developing some resources and programming to help build capacity in the social sector here in St. Louis around data. And the question now is what kind of offerings will be the most useful? And that's where you all come in. So we have spent the last year trying to think about this question. We've read a lot of articles, we've talked to national leaders, and we've talked to local leaders in the field, and we've looked at training programs around this notion of data science, not just data science, but data science for social good, data for social impact, and really looked at what does it look like? What are the skills? What do people really need to do this work well? And one of the things that we've found is there's great materials out there. Nobody has time to wade through them all. So we're hoping to do a little bit of that. But also that a lot of these materials and trainings are really focused on people who are aspiring or existing data scientists already. And that when we look at the social sector, that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people. And so we might need a little bit different set of resources. So really quickly, just to hear from you all for a minute again, I would like to do a quick poll, or Dan will help us in the poll. Think about your current roles with data. Dan? Yeah, just go ahead and jump in. Which of the following best describes your role in relation to data? I see you jumping in. Either it's your primary role, you use data, but it's not your primary focus, you supply data for others in the organization, or maybe you have little or no interaction with data.
in lieu of elevator music or the Jeopardy theme song, which has been getting increased attention these days with their rotating hosts. We'll let things go for just a moment, and we'll end the polling and show the results. Fantastic response rates.
Really good.
Local, state, and national elections have nothing on this group. All right, well, with almost 90% response rate, kudos and cheers to all. We'll end the polling and do the big reveal.
All right. So there are definitely some quote data people in the room. But again, all of the people who responded are data people to some degree. You interact with data. It may or may not be your primary role or your primary training. And so what kinds of resources and trainings are going to best fit your needs in building capacity where you are in your organizations? So this is what we're trying to work on doing. And as some of you are all too aware, many organizations struggle to find the resources to even hire dedicated data people. So what does it mean to build capacity around data in the social sector? We know that for an organization to be more data informed, we have to build capacity across the organization. And this means not only data skills, but other kinds of skills, translational skills. How do we communicate across roles with how to really do this effectively and what is needed? And so in our approach, we're really hoping to meet people where they are in terms of data literacy. And for all the people in this room, for example, you might be at really different places. And so how can we create trainings and materials that you can enter wherever you are? And how can we focus not only on technical skills, although that's a part of it. People may say, hey, we need some help with some basic technical skills, but also some of these other skills, data stewardship, best practices, how to navigate privacy issues, or how to communicate about data across your organization or departments. How to figure out what data to collect in the first place is something we hear a lot to support your missions. Like what are the best things for us to be collecting given our goals? So to help develop these in a way that is most useful, we want to hear from you. And that's why we're here today. We can read and study the problem all year long. And ultimately, it's folks like you who are going to have the best insights into what kind of resources will be helpful. So we got to hear just a little from you when you signed up for the event. And many of you responded to the question on the Eventbrite. What is an example of a success or barrier your organization has had using the data to increase impact? So I'm going to turn it back over to Ivy, who is going to give a snapshot of your answers, and then we will move into breakouts where we will go a little bit further into that conversation. So
thank you, Jenrose. So we look at your answers about some of the challenges or areas of growth in terms of data capacity, and these are some of the things that came up multiple times. So Dan is going to share the poll. So I want you to take time to look at these challenges and check all that applies. Is it limited data analysis capacity, deciding what to measure or collect, sharing data across organizations or jurisdictions, consistency of data fields across sources, or data disaggregated by race and ethnicity? And just like what Dan mentioned a while ago, this compares nothing to the US elections. All votes are coming in, and we're just giving folks a little more time to make sure that they have time to participate in the polls. So we are at 59% participation rate increasing. So we should stop as soon as we reach maybe 80 or 90%. All right. We're at 75% and the counter stopped. So going once or twice. Oh, okay, it's still increasing. So yeah, I'm very excited to share the result. Okay. So, well, thank you everyone for your responses. It looks like, well, let me share that. Okay. It looks like several of these resonates with a larger group. And really, this is helpful for us to know as we start to develop tools and resources to address some of these challenges. Now, building on this, we are now going into breakout groups and dig a little bit deeper into what kinds of resources might be beneficial to you and your organization as you build capacity around data and what we can do to lift up those efforts. And I want you to know that we want you to know that, you know, some people might not be able to participate, and that's okay. And we want you to feel comfortable participating, even if it may mean just listening, because we really hope that you can join us in whatever way you can. So you're automatically assigned to your groups, and if anyone has trouble getting in, somebody is here in the main room to help you out. So we'll see you all in the breakout rooms.
Welcome back, everyone. Let everybody make their way back from breakouts. Well, I know we had a great conversation in our group. I don't know about the rest of you, but Dan is laughing, so they must have had a big party in that room.
Well, I'm usually laughing on Zoom, and it's great when we come back from breakouts because sometimes people forget to turn their cameras back off. So it's nice to see a couple of familiar faces and colleagues, blast from the past, some new friends. We had a great conversation in breakout room 2, which I'm sure everyone in breakout room 2 would attest to. Barb, I couldn't tell if that was oh, thank you, Joe, with the thumbs up. Barb, I couldn't tell if you're doing a thumbs up or the
Can you take people off of mute?
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to give folks a chance to chime in, whether you were leading the breakout room or if you were in the breakout room. And just say something that stood out to you in your conversation. I will start with just by saying in our room, we had a really great range of people in terms of what kinds of organizations they were working with and what kinds of work they were doing with data. So it made for a good conversation about, you know, how can we move this work forward? What kind of resources would be useful? I really enjoyed the conversation. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in from my room or from another room to share something that jumped out to you. Everybody still seems muted right now.
I really appreciated the focus on how we can look at policy using our data-informed practices. There was a lot of interest in that in our group, and that was encouraging to see. And everyone seemed really awesome.
Great. We had a little policy conversation in our room as well.
I can chime in really quickly. There was a little bit of conversation about data and infrastructure, particularly some of the roadblocks with making sure that staff know how to gather data and know how to enter items into the system and just make sure everybody is on the same page about that training. So it's kind of some of the the crossroads between data and infrastructure work that we'll need to build in order to create a really robust data profile.
I think one thing that rose to the surface in our group that I thought was important was the value of qualitative data. You know, all sorts of data is important, but how do we elevate, you know, stories and knowledge of folks in the community that are like harder to count, but no less valid. And in fact, many times have a lot more to say about people's experience in community than just the things that can be quantified. It's a big challenge to figure out how do you align that in a way where it can kind of like not just be a sort of pull quote to the side, but I think it's a really important thing to focus on moving forward.
So I agree, Paul, and that's not something that we really chatted much in our group about, but it's something that's been a lot on my mind being in the research realm for a while and just seeing how quantitative data is emphasized and prioritized a lot of times over qualitative data. But something I've also been thinking a lot about is how quantitative data doesn't always give us perspectives of context and around the data and maybe the information we're trying to understand. So when looking at qualitative data and experiences and perspectives, we're able to contextualize some of these issues. And I think that'll help us attain the impact that we actually want.
I have time for one or two more comments if anyone has them before we close out.
Group 4 also had kind of two interesting points. One was a lot of interest in data sharing agreements and how you share data across organizations or across different kind of policy areas, if you will, education, health, et cetera. I thought that was really interesting and kind of the barriers that exist to doing that work. And the other one was about power within, recognizing the power that different folks have dependent upon the data that they collect or how they can require other folks to collect certain types of data. And that was a really interesting conversation as well.
Let's see, we have some stuff in the chat as well. Paul. Data required for reporting purposes is very often not the data needed for internal learning and improvement.
Yeah, and this, I think it was it's sort of like what drives data collection in the social sector. I know, Tamara, if you wanted to share in particular, but because I think the number of reports you had to do is like maybe one of the highest sort of on the call of what was sort of required. And it's like, well, this is for compliance. This is what, funders and governments mandate, but they like didn't really check to make sure that like, hey, can you use this too for like what you're trying to do every day? And so it's just like this big, big divide.
Yeah, I'm not sure who that came up with, but that certainly came up in our room that we had one person talking about data for speaking to funders and one person who was a funder. And I think I've heard a lot of conversations about needing to get that dialogue happening with funders as well, because a lot of how data gets collected does get defined by funders in a lot of ways. So I appreciate that.
Well, in addition to thinking how awesome Breakout Room 2 was, I will just share just two brief reflections. So one, the language that our group members were using, to think, that one word or one phrase, I think really painted this nice picture of how folks are thinking about data in very different ways. We had everything from mysterious, translational, community, equity to tool. So, thinking about it both as an abstract concept, but then also very much, these more tangible things that we can use to benefit our work and our organizations and our missions. And then just, as I'm thinking back, and I have my Jamboard cheat sheet here over on the side, just still, the most number of stars for our group went to telling your story. And so really thinking again about the intersections that we want to have with, the possibilities with data, particularly in terms of both informing the work that we're doing, as well as moving into policy and advocacy, which were other themes that came up in our room as well. So thanks, Group 2, for the great conversation.
All right, if nobody else has anything to share. Going, gone. always hard to know how much time to give, but I think I will turn it back over to Dan, and just thank everyone for your feedback. We had a great conversation. Sounds like you all had great conversations in your room, and it's really going to help us. So I'll just turn it back over to Dan to close this out.
We've come to the end, or is it the beginning, or a little bit of both? So just in terms of wrapping us up and next steps, and hopefully giving folks just a couple of minutes back, even potentially, as we're at Friday afternoon, as Ginger mentioned earlier, the weather is beautiful here in St. Louis, and thank you again for spending the time with us. So thank you again, Jenrose and the DSSI team at the Social Policy Institute, and of course, a big thank you to our speakers today and all of you for participating and offering your insights and feedback. So I get to talk about what's next. Along with our partners, we'll be closely reviewing priorities and opportunities shared by you all, our attendees, to inform the launch of training opportunities in early 2022. We'll be convening additional discussions on specific topics that training and future resources can focus on, beginning to offer preliminary programming and opportunities specifically for the St. Louis social sector to continue to connect around, and then disseminating more detailed findings from that preliminary phase and that we mentioned, all those reports and conversations and programs scanned, as well as some of the findings looking across our roundtables. The discussions today were outstanding, as they were in our first roundtable last week, and so we've got a lot to consider and look through. So with that, we like to leave, as always, with 3 things that you can do, because I know people leave these spaces feeling connected and energized and ready to get to work. And so we'd ask and encourage you to bring this discussion that we had here today back with you to your organization. So we have a couple of suggested prompts here, that you can feel free to repurpose and reutilize at an upcoming staff meeting or in a next check-in or one-on-one or whatever your format and platform might be, to ask critical questions, to take a step back and thinking about your data processes within your organization. How are you thinking strategically across your organization? What specific data, tools, or resources would help you achieve the impact that you most want to have? And then how do you communicate and share data across roles, teams, and community partners? We'd love to hear the outcomes and the progress around those questions, the opportunities, the energizing points, the barriers, and the sticking points. So please do stay in touch with us as those are continuing forward, and we'll look forward to hearing back. We also can't help but put in another shameless plug to please do become a member of the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance. I'm a member and you should be too. So the link is here. It was put in the chat earlier and we can drop it again. Here we go. Paul's got it in the chat already with a bit.ly, the join RDA link. Thank you for that, Paul. We hope to see folks at the upcoming their quarterly membership meeting. And then last but not least, we of course want to hear from you. We know that these conversations don't stop when the Zoom turns off. And it's been wonderful and energizing to see a number of familiar faces. Thanks for being here, as well as some new faces as well. So the more that we're able to engage with folks, the more truly that we believe that we're going to be able to provide, deliver, offer, create, and connect around things that will be really meaningful for the St. Louis social sector around data science for social impact. So with that, thank you again. Another big thanks to Jenrose, Fitzgerald, Ivy, and the team at the Social Policy Institute, our amazing partners at Mastercard, the Regional Data Alliance, and data.org. And again, to all of you for spending just a little bit of time on your Friday afternoon, helping to inform this important work. So we'll look forward to seeing you again soon, and thanks again.